Hello, everyone. I want to take a second look at this excerpt from Machiavelli's The Prince. I think that out of the many texts that I've asked you to read for this class, this may be the easiest one to actually look at in terms of, let's say, outlining what the actual argument is. That is, it has a pretty simple logical structure. I think it's very clear. And from, just make it a little bigger, from the opening line, we get a very clear sense of what Machiavelli's main topic is. He opens by asking a question whether it be better to be loved than feared or feared than loved. And he answers that question right away that, you should wish to be both, but because it is difficult to unite them, it's much safer to be feared than loved when you can't be both. So, put in the context of politics, and as I said, I hope in the introductory video, this is really a manual not for how one is necessary to live your personal life or the life of a private person, but the life of the person that he's calling the prince. And he gives one example in history when he talks about Hannibal as somebody he considers to be a prince, a leader, and a leader who has to worry about being followed. So there are certainly many, many people in Machiavelli's own world of Renaissance Italy who he would consider to be a prince, but he would also consider Hannibal, the Carthaginian general who fought the Romans in the ancient world, to be a prince as well. Rather, I would say, wide label for certain figures, but most important is that they're political and military, or both, or one of the other leaders. And in this context, the question is, should such a leader be more worried about being feared or more worried about being loved by their followers or people that they deal with in public life? And again, he answers pretty clearly that the answer is that they should be more worried about being feared, especially if they have to choose one or the other. They should choose fear. That people should fear them rather than love them should be their first priority. So we get a very clear sense of what he's trying to establish here in this excerpt. That is, he's trying to establish why, why it's more important to be feared than to be loved. And then we just get this wonderful indicator here of what is called in, let's say, informal logic books as an inference indicator. Um, that is, what he's signaling with the because is that he's going to give you the reason here for his claim. So that's actually quite helpful. And he does give you his main reason, and his main reason is human nature. And what follows is a statement that, in general, human beings are ungrateful, fickle, false, cowardly, covetous, etc. Human beings are selfish. And as he says, that when you don't need them, they'll promise you anything. And but the real question is when you really need them, need their support, need their sacrifice, need them to do something for you. A lot of people who've promised you everything will let you down if you only rely upon their love. Because as he says at the end here, men have less scruple in offending one who is beloved than one who is feared. For love is preserved by the link of obligation, which owing to the baseness of men is broken at every opportunity for their advantage. But fear preserves you by a dread of punishment which never fails. So why is it better, more advantageous, more important to be feared than to be loved. It's more reliable. If you rely on people's love, you're going to be let down more often because people just won't come through. But if they fear you, as he says, fear preserves you by a dread of punishment which never fails. It's more reliable. Human beings, if they fear you, will be more likely to do what you want for them because they dread punishment. They dread that you'll hurt them. Whereas if you're just relying on their love, if it becomes a tight spot, they'll have less scruple in letting you down. So fear is, human beings being what they are, nature being what it is. Fear is simply more reliable. It's a pretty simple argument, actually, that, as he lays it out in this first paragraph. Now, uh, there is there are what happens in the next paragraph is a qualification of this, where he says, "Nevertheless, a prince ought to inspire fear in such a way that if he does not win love, he avoids hatred." So there's a qualification here. That is that if you can manage it, it's important to be feared without being hated. And we can think of tyrants in history, perhaps, who were not only feared but hated. But you don't want to be hated because if you inspire hatred, then you are putting people in a position where maybe they have nothing to lose and you can't rely upon them because you put them in such a tight spot that despite their fear of you, their hatred means that they're willing to take great risks to take you down. And the main thing here is stay away from people's property, as he says. Respect people's property to the extent that you can because you don't want them to be put in a position where they have nothing to lose. If you're impoverishing everybody, let's say by high taxes or just expropriating their property, then you are provoking rebellion. So there is a qualification here, as he says, that you should inspire fear, but avoid people hating you because if people hate you, then they will be willing to do whatever they need to do to defend themselves. Finally, we get this really fascinating passage about Hannibal, and one may wonder what it's doing here. He also mentions Scipio, the Roman general who fought Hannibal. They're victorious. I don't know if he fought Hannibal, actually. I'm sorry. It might have been another later. There were three Punic Wars. I don't know which one was which. But the contrast between Hannibal and Scipio, between the Carthaginian general and the Roman general, is very instructive because what he says about Hannibal is meant to bear out his general claim about fear being more effective than love. And one of the things he says about Hannibal is that Hannibal, as he says, had inhuman cruelty. His soldiers were terrified of him. And this is why, he says, there were no rebellions within Hannibal's ranks, even though Hannibal's armies consisted, as he says, of varied races of men. There were Carthaginians, there were Spaniards, there were Gauls, there were people from other lands in North Africa besides Carthage who were all fighting together under Hannibal's army in a foreign land, in Italy. So one can imagine the difficulty that that did present itself in keeping such an army together. But they never rebelled. Why, Machiavelli asks? Well, because they were terrified of him. What would happen to them if they crossed him? And that Scipio, the Roman general, was too soft, and he did have to deal with rebellions, even though he was a wonderful general and a wonderful man. According to Machiavelli, he was not as successful as Hannibal because he wasn't good at inspiring enough fear in his troops. So I think that the anecdote about Hannibal and Scipio is meant to illustrate or to provide some kind of empirical proof of the general thesis that's presented in the first paragraph here. So wonderful. I'm not saying that Machiavelli is right or that what he's talking about is necessarily nice or whatever, but a wonderful little argument, wonderful and provocative argument about human relations here. And I think, as I said in the beginning of this video, one of the most succinct and easily identifiable arguments that we've come across in these very challenging passages that I've been giving you from mostly from the history of philosophy.